It's been well documented over the past decade that mainstream media is on its way out, while new and independent media is on the way in. It's also been well documented that Protestant Christianity in the West is in moral decline. Theologians, pastors, authors, and laymen have forgotten that Christian conviction is comprehensive and should touch every aspect of a believer's life. This was common knowledge throughout church history. If you're a Christian at church, you should also be a Christian at home, at work, and at school. No exceptions. You even need to be a Christian on election day and in your involvement in politics and government. But it seems that Christians in America haven't been able to put the pieces together. There's been so much talk of third-wayism, voting Democrat as a Christian, and respecting everyone's political opinions, as if politics is somehow detached from theology. The fact is that politics are not detached from theology. In fact, politics are actually an extension of theological conviction. To be Christians, we must care about policy, law, and governance in our country. We must care for and will the good of others in our society, beginning first with those in our own home and then working our way out to the rest of the country. And the only way that we can do that is by knowing what is actually happening around us in our city, in our state, and in our country. We have to be informed to be able to act and love. Now, I found it disturbing to see different news outlets in the Christian realm fail to make the connection between theology, politics, ethics, and morality. Because in reporting the news, you have to have moral clarity. That's something that the American church has lost, is moral clarity. Now, orthodoxy and order is going to be different. I won't equivocate on moral issues like abortion and transgenderism, like so many Protestants have in recent years. No, in fact, I will aim to tell it like it is. An immoral world requires Christians to be moral and just in their words and actions. Orthodoxy and order will do just that. Every week on Friday, I'll bring you the news from the past week with clear theological commentary and precise reporting, along with some other interesting facts, book recommendations, and historical quotes. See, Christ brought us orthodoxy. He brought us the truth, and that orthodoxy produces clarity and order. It doesn't produce confusion and chaos. Thus, I have named my new newsletter Orthodoxy and Order. Now, if you want to subscribe to the new newsletter, which I hope that you will, you can click the link in the description, or you can go to www.orthodoxyandorder.com. For those of you who have followed this podcast for several years, maybe even from the beginning, you might know that a long time ago, not really that long ago, but a couple of years ago, I started a media company called Optive Network. Obviously, that didn't work out, and we don't need to get into why that didn't work out. But one of the main things, we don't need to get all the details, but one of the main reasons why it didn't work out was because there was no conviction behind it. The whole idea was everybody can have a seat at the table and have a conversation, and all ideas are valid and all ideas matter. Now, this is obviously not true. There are some ideas that are just bad and destructive and shouldn't actually have a seat at the table. I think that postmodernism is that way. I think that liberalism is that way. I think that Marxism is that way. Like, I don't actually want to talk with a Marxist about problems because their entire philosophical worldview and presuppositions are contrary to reality. And there's a very difficult time. You're going to have a very difficult time actually finding common ground on anything. And so those conversations oftentimes become destructive and unhelpful. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't debate. I'm not saying that people shouldn't disagree. I think that there should be disagreement, but I think that there's serious philosophical presuppositions within particular political philosophies and theological convictions that really mean that we just shouldn't converse about the issue, because I don't think that there's going to make any difference, any change. That said, Optive Network didn't work because it wasn't a good idea. I mean, and I take responsibility for that. But I haven't had anybody subscribe to the Substack for a long time. There's all those people who had subscribed in the beginning. Some people have unsubscribed. Some people have randomly found it. I send my podcast out through that every single week, and I've been doing that for a year and a half. That said, now I'm doing this new newsletter called Orthodoxy and Order. I've always wanted to do some sort of publication. I want to write more. I want to give my opinion on politics, and I want to have it connected to theological conviction and doctrine. And I thought Orthodoxy and Order is the best way to do that. So basically the premise of this is that I'm going to write on the 3 to 5 main topics of the past week, the main news stories. I'm going to tell you what the story is actually is, and then I'm going to actually give some commentary on it and show how you can understand this from a conservative Christian conviction. How do you actually engage with the political world and the news in a way that actually is consistent with theology, with biblical theology, and with what the Bible says? Now, this is certainly happening because there aren't really many good Christian publications out there. There are so many run by elitists who are equivocating and pontificating and contradicting themselves every other word. I just read an article on First Things the other day, which I think at one point was a pretty decent publication, in which the main point of the article, and this is, I'm not even joking, I'm actually going to pull it up right now just so I can read the first sentence, because it completely contradicted itself. And it was actually, it's funny, but it's also pretty sad. So this is the article from First Things called Appeasement and Just War Reasoning. Obviously, it's about Donald Trump and Zelensky. Here's what he said. He says, on the last day of February, President Zelensky of Ukraine was ambushed and sent packing from a White House meeting with President Trump. Their disagreement is, in a way, simple, yet also complicated. That's the first two sentences. So the first sentence says that Zelensky was ambushed by Trump. And so you already know he's a liberal. You already know that this guy wants us to give endless money to Ukraine. You know that he's an unequivocating supporter of Zelensky, and you know that he doesn't like Donald Trump. And then the next sentence with his, I mean, this guy has a degree he's a senior research professor of theology at Valparaiso University. You would think he's important. I don't think he's that important. He says, their disagreement is, in a way, it's simple, yet also complicated. Here's the reality. It's either simple or complicated. You can't have something that is both simple and complicated. That's a contradiction. Either it's simple or it's complicated. No, this guy is a genius. He's brilliant. He runs a thing somewhere and that people care about. And so he says it's simple and it's complicated. And this is First Things. First Things was, Christian. I think it had Catholic roots, but generally speaking, I think it had produced some good stuff over the years. I talked to my last podcast about Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition, major problems with those publications. They seem to have lost every sense of moral compass. They have absolutely no idea which way is up, which way is down, what way we're supposed to be going as Christians, and what is moral and what is good and right. They are just fully on board with whatever liberal agenda, Democrat agenda they can benefit from, of course, as they receive indirect funds from the government. So no surprise there, but orthodoxy in order. My goal here is to, one, give as clear and concise a theological look and a biblical look into the political issues of our time. And two, just to show people that if you're feeling weird, if you go to a church and you feel like your pastor's being weird, he's not really sticking up for the right things. He's not really caring about the right problems. He's not really talking to the right issues. He's not actually discussing things that are happening in our world. He's not talking about the immorality that we have to deal with every day in the world that we live in. He's not applying theological doctrine to everyday life. He's not telling you that you should not vote for people who want to murder babies, that want to butcher children, that want to butcher human beings. If you have a pastor who's doing that and you're kind of like, yeah, I think something's wrong here, and you go talk to your pastor, this happens all the time, you go talk to your pastor and they gaslight you and they tell you that you're not being loving and blah, 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 and everybody can vote for anybody and it doesn't matter because politics is over there and theology is over here. Like, this point of this newsletter is to tell you that's not true. Actually, there is a consistent and ordered way of thinking as a Christian, and it should produce a particular type of conservatism and a rejection of liberalism rooted in negative liberty. And I want to show that in this newsletter. And so I'm going through all of the main stories of the week, every single week on Friday, and going to give the general outline of the story, and then I'll give a little bit of commentary. Here's how to think through it. Now, these are long. These aren't for people who want a short snippet TikTok sort of thing. No, this is going to be a long email every Friday because it's the news from the whole week, and I don't like to just do the short little thing because people have the attention span of a goldfish. I want actually to have nice, long, comprehensive thoughts written down on paper, and I want you all to be able to read that, interact with it. I'm sure people will disagree with certain things, and I'm totally fine with that. But I think we can hash it out in the comments or something like that, or we can email back and forth. At the end of every email, I'll give a quote of the week and a book recommendation because I think we should be reading books. But this will be something that I send out every week, and I really hope that you subscribe to it. I'll just say, I was looking at the statistics for this podcast just today, and I was actually kind of shocked because I look at the numbers, like how many followers I have and things like that across different platforms, but I've never done all the math. I'm not a math person. And today I went in and I looked at when I stopped doing the podcast with my co-host about a little over a year ago. It was in January of 2024. I stopped doing a podcast with Nick. Him and I used to do this podcast together. And I looked, so from the beginning of this podcast in 2019 till 2024, how many followers I gained across all the platforms. And then I looked from that point of when I had stopped recording with Nick and just done it on my own till now, how many followers I had gained. Now it looks like, and I'm not good at math, but I have gained more followers in the last year on this podcast across all the platforms than I gained with Nick in 5 years. That said, nothing against Nick, by the way. Nothing against Nick. Other than that, people might just be sick and tired of pastors trying to gaslight and tell you that you can be pro-Hamas and you can be a Christian. It's really complicated. It's actually not complicated. People are just sick of pastors without any moral backbone. I know that. But that said, there are a lot more people listening to this podcast now than there were before, and I think this is the right time to start a newsletter and to send this out every week, or I'll try to send out every single week. I really enjoy looking into these things, looking into politics and connecting it to theology. I think that Protestants need a much, much, much better political philosophy, and I applaud the Catholics. My political philosophy comes from a Catholic. The one that I take on mostly, the political philosophy that I think is the most comprehensive and the most biblical is post-liberalism, which is Patrick Deneen, sort of Why Liberalism Failed. Fantastic book. I did an interview with him. You can go listen to that. That said, just to remind you, go to www.orthodoxyandorder.com and sign up for the newsletter, or just click the link in the description. I'm just going to keep telling people about this over the next couple of months. I really hope people subscribe to it. I hope you engage with it. I hope you send it to people. I am working hard on it. My wife helps. She edits it. I'm illiterate, basically, so I write things that probably don't make sense on the paper, and then she edits it, and then it makes sense. So that's how that should work. And I'll read you, though, before we leave, I will read you this week's quote of the week. It's by Charles Spurgeon. You should know who Charles Spurgeon is. If you don't know who Charles Spurgeon is, go and Google Charles Spurgeon. It says, I often hear it said, quote, do not bring religion into politics. This is precisely where it ought to be brought. We have had enough of clever men without conscience. Now let us see what honest, God-fearing men will do. So that's the quote of the week. That is Charles Spurgeon. Look, I know this is just a little bit of a rant, a little 10-minute, 12, 15, I don't know how long this is, a little bit of a podcast on my new newsletter, but I really hope that people go subscribe to that. Go subscribe to the newsletter. It'll come to your inbox every Friday, orthodoxyandorder.com, or click the link in the description. Thanks for listening to this, and I have some interesting podcasts coming up in the next couple of weeks. I really hope that you enjoy those.